This is an iconic Android device, which is almost 6 years old in 2026, the Google Pixel 4a 5G. What's it like to use it today? Can a 2020 mid-range phone still hold up in a world of foldables, AI cameras, and flagship 5G phones? Let's find out. I picked up this Pixel 4a 5G back in 2021 when I needed a reliable Android daily driver, and honestly, it stuck with me longer than I expected. This phone was never a flagship, but it struck a smart balance. Solid performance, great camera for the price, and 5G connectivity when that was still new for many phones. Let's start with design. In 2020, the Pixel 4a 5G had a simple look, a polycarbonate body with Gorilla Glass 3 up front, a punch-hole selfie camera, and slightly thicker bezels compared to modern phones. In 2026, most smartphones will have ultra-thin bezels, curved edges, and premium glass or ceramic builds. So yes, by today's standards, the Pixel 4a 5G feels chunky and old school. But that simplicity is part of its charm. It's light, comfortable in the hand, and because it isn't slippery glass, it survives minor drops better than most current flagships. The 6.2-inch OLED display isn't the sharpest or brightest by today's standards, but it's good enough. Sharp enough that I never notice individual pixels and colorful enough to enjoy movies. This has a single hole punch camera, thin bezels, and a small chin at the bottom. The only downside is that the display is only 60 Hz, so scrolling feels slower compared to modern phones. But after a while, my eyes adjusted. It reminded me how normal 60 Hz once felt. It still handles 4K YouTube and HDR Netflix without issues. The other downside is that this display struggles outdoors. This panel really disappoints when it comes to sunny days. Arguably the biggest reason people bought this phone was the camera. It has a 12-megapixel main sensor plus a 16-megapixel ultra-wide lens, a combo that produces punchy photos with great color and dynamic range for its class. Still, if all I want are clean photos for social or memories of a day out, this old Pixel can still deliver. Especially in daylight, the colors and HDR still pop, and the ultra-wide is useful even by today's standards. It's just not going to win awards against modern flagships. Pixel phones have always leaned heavily on software, and portrait mode is where that really shows on the Pixel 4a 5G. Even 5 years later, portrait photos still look unmistakably Pixel. The subject stays sharp, and the background blur feels gentle instead of aggressive. Google never pushed that over-processed beauty filter look, and that restraint helps these portraits age better than you'd expect. Where this phone really starts to struggle is video, and that's not surprising. Video was never Google's strongest area back then, and the Pixel 4a 5G makes that clear almost immediately. On paper, the specs sound solid. The main camera can shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second, while the ultra-wide lens tops out at 4K 30. But in actual use, the experience feels dated. There's noticeable sharpening, colors lean slightly washed out, and dynamic range feels limited, especially when moving between light and shadow. Stabilization is present, but it's basic. It smooths out small movements, yet it struggles with walking shots or more dynamic motion. Low-light video is where the limitations really show. Noise builds up quickly, detail falls apart, and the image loses that clean, controlled look the Pixel still manages in photos. Overall, video on the Pixel 4a 5G is usable, but only just. It's fine for quick clips, casual memories, or social media, but it's not something you'd rely on if video is your priority. Compared to how well Pixel photos have aged, video is where time has caught up the fastest. Pixel 4a 5G runs a Snapdragon 765G with 6 GB of RAM. Solid for 2020 mid-range performance, handling everyday stuff like messaging, browsing, and social media smoothly. When I multitask or try to run heavier apps, the phone can occasionally stutter or reload apps in the background, but you can expect this from a 5-year-old phone. Gaming on the Pixel 4a 5G is possible, as long as expectations stay realistic. This was never a gaming-focused phone, even when it was new, and 5 years later, that reality is even clearer. Lighter titles and older games run smoothly, while more demanding games are playable at lower settings. Frame rates can dip occasionally and the phone warms up during longer sessions, but it never becomes uncomfortable or locks up. The Snapdragon 765G and Adreno 620 aren't made for high-end graphics, and heavy games reveal the limits. But for casual play or short sessions, the Pixel 4a 5G remains surprisingly capable. Official updates for the Pixel 4a 5G ended at Android 14, so this phone hasn't seen the latest Android features or security patches in a while. That's a downside in 2026. Modern phones get years of support, which Apple and even Google themselves now promise much longer. But interestingly, because the core Android experience was clean and straightforward, the phone still feels familiar even next to current devices. So, should you use a Google Pixel 4a 5G in 2026? If you already own one and you're not a heavy power user who needs top-tier performance, you can. It's not cutting edge anymore, but it's reliable, comfortable in the hand, and still gets the basics right, especially camera and everyday use. And that's kind of beautiful to see in a 6-year-old phone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this nostalgia meets modern review, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments what old tech you want me to revisit next. This is MacRewind, where old tech lives again.